The sky was burning. Elias Voss stood on the balcony of the crumbling command center, watching as streaks of fire rain from the heavens, each impact carving fresh wounds into Earth cities. The Galactic Council had arrived, and they had come with a singular demand: tribute. The Council's fleet hung above the planet like a constellation of executioners, their ships vast and monolithic, each one capable of razing a continent with a single command. Humanity's defenses had held, briefly. The orbital stations had fired first, sending desperate bursts of plasma and railgun fire in the void, but the counterattack had been swift and merciless. Now, the remains of those stations drifted in the atmosphere, glowing embers falling like condemned angels. Voss clenched his jaw as another explosion bloomed in the distance. He could still hear the desperate voices of soldiers who had died screaming in the upper stratosphere. He had promised them a fighting chance. He had lied. A voice crackled through the communicator on his wrist. "Commander, the Council's envoy is transmitting again." Voss turned from the ruined skyline and strode through the broken halls of the command center. The war had reduced this place to a shell of its former self, once a proud military installation, now a glorified bunker. He passed battered soldiers, their uniforms stained with blood and soot, their eyes hollowed by exhaustion. They all knew the truth. Earth was lost. The only question left was how they would fall. In the central chamber, a hologram flickered to life. It was him, Grand Imperator HFY. The alien's presence was suffocating even through projection. Cloaked in ceremonial gold and obsidian, HFY radiated the cold arrogance of a being who had crushed 1,000 civilizations beneath his boot. His elongated features bore a look of supreme disinterest, as though he had already moved past the conquest of Earth and onto the next trivial campaign. "Humans," he said, his voice like silk stretched over a blade. "Your defiance has been instructive, but it is at an end. The Galactic Council demands tribute." Voss remained silent, jaw tight. He could feel the weight of every soldier in the room, waiting for his response. HFY continued, pacing within the confines of his projected throne. "Gold, minerals, biological laborers. Your resources are of value. Your people are of use. But your resistance is meaningless. This is not a negotiation. This is an ultimatum." His eyes, black as the void between stars, narrowed slightly. "Kneel, and your world will be spared." A heavy silence settled in the chamber. The words had been spoken. The executioner's blade had been raised. Dr. Helena Carter stepped forward, adjusting the glasses on her soot-streaked face. A civilian linguist, she had been pulled into the military's ranks when Earth first detected the Council's transmissions. It was she who had deciphered their language, their demands, their history. And it was she who now dared to speak. "You have conquered thousands of worlds," she said, voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "But you have never faced one like ours." HFY regarded her with a flicker of amusement. The bravado of the doomed. Carter's gaze did not waver. "You assume we will kneel. You assume we will break, as every species before us has. You do not understand what you have awakened." HFY leaned forward, intrigued. "Enlighten me." Voss exhaled slowly. This was madness. But then again, surrender was simply another kind of death. "Earth has stood alone before," Voss said, voice cold as steel. "We have survived against odds that should have destroyed us. We have fought, bled, and died for our freedom." His fists tightened at his sides. "You believe we will give you tribute." He let the silence stretch, the weight of his next words pressing down like a storm. "But we will give you nothing." HFY tilted his head. "Nothing." Voss took a step forward, eyes locked onto the Imperator's. "No." The single word echoed through the chamber, cutting through the air like a gunshot. HFY blinked, his expression unreadable. "No." He repeated it, as if tasting the foreign syllable on his tongue. Dr. Carter nodded. "That is our answer." For the first time, the Imperator was silent. A long, dangerous pause stretched between them. The chamber was deathly still, every soldier and officer holding their breath. Then HFY smiled. It was not a pleasant thing. A fascinating display. he mused. Truly. He straightened, brushing non-existent dust from his ornate robes. I had wondered if humanity would be capable of surprising me. I see now that you are. The hologram flickered, the transmission shifting as the Imperator gave a subtle gesture to someone unseen. Unfortunately for you, he said, surprise does not equate to victory. The transmission ended. An alarm shrieked through the command center. Red lights flashed. A frantic officer turned to Voss, his face pale. Sir, new energy signatures detected. The fleet is powering up their primary weapons. Voss inhaled sharply. They had made their choice, and now the reckoning would come. The skies split open with fire. From the heavens, columns of plasma rained down, turning night into a searing mockery of daylight. The Galactic Council had decided Earth's defiance would not be tolerated. Entire city blocks evaporated in an instant, skyscrapers toppling like brittle bones as shockwaves rippled outward. Millions were dying, and millions more would follow. In the subterranean depths of the command center, alarms howled, drowning out the panicked voices of officers scrambling for a strategy that did not exist. Earth's defenses were spent. The orbital fleet was gone. The great planetary shields, once the pride of humanity's last stand, had flickered and failed beneath the overwhelming onslaught. And yet, Elias Voss stood unwavering. He watched the destruction on the holographic displays, his fists clenched at his sides. Every fiber of his being screamed to act, to strike back, to do something, but there was nothing left to throw at the enemy. Humanity had played its hand. The answer had been given. No. Dr. Helena Carter pressed her hands against the war table, staring at the readouts with the pale, stunned look of someone who had seen a future unravel in real time. They're erasing us. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. They're trying, Voss corrected, forcing steel into his words. But we are not done yet. Across the chamber, Sergeant Darius Lee emerged from a stairwell, his uniform streaked with blood, some of it his own, most of it not. He carried a rifle slung across his back, though it had long since become a useless weight. Bullets meant nothing against warships the size of mountains. They've started landing operations, Lee reported grimly. Their ground forces are hitting the outskirts. Infantry, drones, mechanized units. He exhaled sharply. They're not just here to burn us down. They're here to take whatever's left. A bitter laugh escaped Carter's lips. Of course they are. Conquest isn't just about destruction. It's about ownership. She turned to Voss. They're still expecting us to break. They think if they apply just enough pressure, we'll crawl to them and beg. Voss's expression darkened. That was the logic of the council. Force submission, demand compliance, absorb the defeated into their vast empire of servitude. They had done it before 1,000 times over, and not once in all their history had a species dared to meet their demands with a simple refusal. Until now, a transmission request pulsed on the command terminal. It bore the seal of the council's flagship. HFY. Voss inhaled deeply, then answered. The Imperator's image flickered into being, his obsidian eyes studying them with something dangerously close to curiosity. In the background of the projection, the bridge of his warship was calm, the hum of an empire's war machine operating without concern. You persist. The words carried no anger, only an analytical detachment, as if he were speaking to an anomaly rather than a doomed species. Even now, you do not kneel. Voss met his gaze unflinchingly. And we never will. HFY exhaled slowly, as though tasting the moment. Fascinating, he murmured. He tilted his head slightly, then gestured to something off-screen. The image shifted, replaced by live footage from orbit, Earth bleeding fire, its continent scarred by the bombardment. You are dying, HFY said, his voice almost gentle. You must understand this. Voss said nothing. I have seen civilizations rise and fall. I have witnessed the last cries of kings, the final prayers of those who believe themselves unconquerable. I do not revel in their demise. I do not take pleasure in their suffering. HFY's gaze sharpened. But I recognize inevitability when I see it. His voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. Your species is resilient, admirable, even. That is why I offer this final chance. Submit. Accept the order of the galaxy. And in time, you will thrive under our rule. He leaned forward. This is mercy, Elias Voss. This is the only path that does not end in extinction. Voss did not blink. No. Silence. Xavex stared at him, and for the first time, the flicker of something unfamiliar crossed his face. Doubt. A second passed. Then two. The Imperator straightened, expression unreadable. So be it. The transmission cut out. Carter released a slow, shuddering breath. That was our last chance. Lee ran a hand down his face, exhaustion seeping through his frame. They're going to wipe us out. No, Voss murmured, his mind racing. No, they won't. Both Carter and Lee turned to him. The Council has always conquered through certainty, Voss continued. They assume their power is absolute. They assume their demands will be met. They assume submission is inevitable. His fingers curled into a fist. But we have shown them something they have never encountered before. Carter's eyes widened slightly. She understood. Doubt. Voss nodded. The Council thrives on control, but we just introduced chaos into their equation. They expected us to surrender. They don't know what to do with no. A spark of something fierce lit in Lee's gaze. You're saying we've shaken them? We've done more than that, Carter said, stepping forward. Xavex just revealed something without realizing it. He's not used to negotiation. He's not used to having to persuade. That means he's worried. Voss's mind worked quickly, threading the possibilities together. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. The moment that word left our lips, we became something bigger. Carter's voice dropped, a realization dawning. We became a symbol. Voss nodded, and symbols had power. The Council's empire was vast, stretching across the void, built on the backs of species who had once stood where humanity stood now. Beaten, conquered, erased. But what if they weren't alone? What if the Council's perfect, immovable dominion was nothing more than a brittle illusion? What if others were watching? Carter turned to the holomap, her fingers dancing over the display. I can hijack their transmission network, she said, adrenaline sharpening her tone. If we broadcast our defiance, if we make sure every conquered world hears what we've done. Voss felt the weight of history shifting beneath them. If we give them hope, he finished. A slow grin spread across Lee's face. Then maybe we won't be the only ones saying no. For the first time since the war began, a flicker of possibility cut through the darkness. The Galactic Council had come to collect their tribute, but instead, they had awakened a revolution. The first Galactic Council warship fell from the sky like a dying star. Elias Voss watched as the burning wreckage tumbled through the atmosphere, trailing fire and smoke, before it struck the ocean with a deafening impact. The waves swallowed the ruin of the once mighty vessel, but the message had already been sent. Humanity was not alone. The revolution had begun. Across the war room, Dr. Helena Carter's hands trembled as she scrolled through intercepted transmissions, her eyes scanning the chaos unraveling across the Council's dominion. It's working, she breathed. They're rising up. Everywhere. Sergeant Darius Lee let out a low whistle as he studied the live feeds. Damn. He shook his head, a grin breaking through his exhaustion. We really did it. The signal had spread like wildfire. In the past hours, resistance movements across the galaxy, long thought broken, scattered, or buried, had ignited. The Council's fleet, stretched thin across its vast empire, was no longer an unshakable force. Uprisings erupted on planets that had suffered centuries under the Council's rule. Formerly loyal worlds hesitated, their leaders seeing, perhaps for the first time, that the Council was not omnipotent. And here, on Earth, the war was changing. The initial bombardment had slowed, not because of mercy, but because the Council was now forced to reassess. They had expected swift, absolute dominance. Instead, they faced a species that refused to kneel and a galaxy that had suddenly found its courage. They're losing their grip, Carter murmured. They don't know how to contain this. Voss exhaled, his mind racing through the possibilities. Victory was still distant, but for the first time, it was no longer impossible. Then the command center doors burst open. A soldier staggered inside, her uniform torn, face smeared with blood. "Commander," she gasped, "they've breached the city perimeter." The momentary triumph in the room evaporated. Voss straightened. "Where?" "Downtown, Sector 5, the soldier rasped. "Ground forces. Heavy armor. They're coming straight for us." Lee's fingers tightened around his rifle. "They want to cut the head off the snake." Carter's face paled. "They know we sent the transmission. They're not here to conquer anymore. They're here to erase us." Voss felt his pulse steady, the sharp clarity of battle settling over him. "Then we hold." The remaining soldiers scrambled into position, barricading the corridors, checking their weapons. The command center, already battered from the initial invasion, was not a fortress. If the Council's forces pushed hard enough, they would break through. Voss turned to Carter. "Get underground. If this place falls, you have to make sure the signal keeps going." Carter's eyes blazed with defiance. "You're not getting rid of me that easily, Voss." "We don't have time to argue," he shot back. "The revolution doesn't survive if we all die here." A deep, reverberating boom shook the walls. The first Council walker had arrived. Lee cocked his rifle and smirked. "Well, guess we're about to find out if humanity can fight gods." The assault began. The first wave of Council troops stormed the shattered streets, tall, sleek warriors clad in segmented armor, their weapons spitting energy bolts that turned concrete to vapor. Behind them, mechanical constructs lumbered forward, their heavy plasma cannons melting entire buildings into slag. But Earth's defenders met them head-on. Lee led a squad of resistance fighters through the ruins, weaving between debris as they launched ambushes, detonating explosives that sent alien bodies flying. Smoke and screams filled the air as the once pristine streets of the city turned into a battlefield of wreckage and blood. Voss stood at the heart of the command center's last line of defense, barking orders as the remaining soldiers poured fire down the corridors, turning each hallway into a death trap. A monstrous war machine loomed in the distance, its silhouette framed against the burning skyline. The Council's juggernaut, a towering behemoth of metal and destruction, its cannons priming to end what remained of Earth's resistance. Voss set his jaw. "Lee, tell me we've got something left." Lee wiped blood from his cheek, then grinned. "Oh, we've got something." From the wreckage of an old skyscraper, a group of human engineers, once powerless against their oppressors, unleashed their secret weapon. A hijacked Council tank, its controls rewired, its plasma cannon aimed directly at the Juggernaut's core. A single shot. The sky lit up as the alien war machine exploded, its own power source tearing it apart from within. The blast rocked the battlefield, sending Council troops into chaos. The tide was turning. For the first time in history, the Invincible had bled. HFY watched the battle unfold from the bridge of his warship, his fingers steepled before him. Around him, his officers murmured in disbelief, their carefully ordered ranks fraying at the edges. This was not how it was meant to go. "Grand Imperator," one of his aides stammered, "should we order full planetary cleansing?" HFY did not answer immediately. His black eyes studied the images of the battlefield below, the humans refusing to break, the revolution spreading beyond this single world, the cracks forming in the very foundation of the empire he had served for centuries. He had believed Earth to be nothing more than another conquest, a stubborn but inevitable addition to the Council's dominion. He had been wrong. His fingers curled into a fist. "Prepare the fleet for withdrawal," he said at last. The bridge fell silent. "Sir," HFY's voice was ice. "If we crush them now, we make them martyrs. If we retreat, we make them legends." His expression darkened. "Let them believe they have won this battle. Let them think they have changed the order of the galaxy." He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto the planet below. "Because next time, there will be no negotiations." On the surface, as the last of the enemy war machines collapsed, Elias Voss stood amidst the rubble, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Carter limped toward him, her face streaked with sweat and grime. "They're pulling back." Lee, bloodied but grinning, laughed hoarsely. We actually made them run. Voss exhaled slowly, looking up at the Council warships retreating into the dark void beyond Earth's atmosphere. This war was far from over, but humanity had done the impossible. They had said no, and the galaxy had heard them. The dead lay in the streets, and the fires had not yet gone out. Elias Voss stood at the edge of a shattered avenue, staring out over the ruins of Earth's last stand. Smoke curled into the sky, thick with the stench of war, burnt metal, scorched flesh, the acrid tang of plasma fire. The Galactic Council's fleet had withdrawn, but their absence did not feel like a victory. It felt like the breath before the next storm. Behind him, the survivors moved among the wreckage, searching for the wounded, gathering the lost. Some wept. Some sat in silent shock. Others, their hands still tight around weapons, watched the sky as if expecting the enemy to return at any moment. Voss had seen war before, but nothing like this. This was no battlefield with clear lines. This was devastation. And yet, they were alive. Dr. Helena Carter approached, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion, but burning with something deeper. "Transmission reports are coming in from across the galaxy," she said. "The uprisings are spreading. More worlds are fighting back." She exhaled, running a hand through her soot-streaked hair. "We started something bigger than us, Elias." Voss didn't turn from the horizon. "I know." Carter hesitated, then glanced toward the remnants of the war room, now little more than a hollowed-out shell of concrete and steel. "But so do they." She didn't have to say who they were. Voss had felt at the moment Xavex's fleet pulled away. This retreat was not surrender. It was a recalibration. The Council had ruled through fear for millennia, and fear was only effective as long as it remained absolute. Humanity had cracked that illusion. Now, the Council would respond. Sergeant Darius Lee limped toward them, his rifle still slung across his back, a bloody bandage wrapped around his left arm. "Scouts picked up something interesting," he said. "Some of the Council ground forces refused to evac. They surrendered." Voss raised an eyebrow. "Council troops don't surrender." "Not until today," Lee said, smirking despite the fatigue weighing him down. "Seems like some of them aren't as eager to die for their empire as they thought." He shrugged. Or maybe they just realized they were fighting on the wrong side. Carter folded her arms. "If their own soldiers are questioning the war, then the cracks are deeper than we thought." Voss considered that. If even some of the enemy's forces could be turned, or at least convinced to stand down, it could change everything. The Council's greatest strength wasn't just their military might. It was their unity, the belief that they were an unstoppable force. But now doubt was spreading, and doubt was dangerous. A flickering alert pulsed on Carter's wrist console. She checked it, then frowned. "Incoming transmission. Unidentified source." Voss stiffened. "Council." Carter shook her head. "No, it's coming from deep space. Some kind of long-range burst signal." She hesitated. "It's on our frequency." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Voss nodded. "Put it through." Carter tapped the console, and a rough, static-filled voice crackled to life. "Humanity, you are heard." The voice was alien. Not Council, not one of their oppressors. Something else. A second voice joined the first. "We have seen your defiance." A third, "And we are ready." Carter's breath hitched. "My God." Lee blinked. "Are they saying what I think they're saying?" Voss felt his pulse quicken. The implications were staggering. If other species had seen Earth stand, if they had been waiting for something to push back against the Council's reign, then this war was no longer just about humanity. It was about all of them. The transmission continued. "The Council is wounded, but not broken. They will return. And when they do, we must be ready." Voss nodded slowly. "We will be." A pause. Then the voices spoke as one. "Then we stand together." The transmission cut out. Silence stretched between them. Then Lee let out a low, incredulous laugh. "I can't believe it. We actually started a goddamn revolution." Carter's hands were trembling. They were waiting for a spark. She swallowed hard. "And we were the spark." Voss turned his gaze back to the sky. The stars seemed different now. No longer distant, no longer cold. They were full of possibility. Full of war. Xavex would return. The Council would not accept defiance. But when they came, they would not find a broken world waiting for annihilation. They would find an alliance forged in fire. Humanity had been given a choice: submit or be destroyed. Instead, they had answered with a single word: no. And the galaxy had answered back: